Alright, just to go over the last part of Unit 9 you need to study for the global exam is the colonization and the conquest of America. So we need to see a few reasons why it was so quick, why the colonists were able to sort of defeat and destroy the native population so quickly. There's four main reasons. The first one is the element of surprise. Imagine that Europe all of a sudden had invaders coming from outside and they didn't know what it was. Well, it happened, like with the Vikings, and they absolutely destroyed Europe during the Viking Age, right? There's no way to know they're coming, and obviously you're going to win if you do that. They also had horses, which are much faster and stronger than the llamas that basically they had in Peru, and nothing comparable in Mexico, right? Infighting among the indigenous people. You need to know the term infighting. It means that each tribe within the Americas was fighting with the other tribes, right? They were not a united people. In the same way that Europe was not a united Europe. You had different kingdoms that were fighting against each other, right? So they use that, especially in certain empires like the Aztecs. We'll see that they use that to their disadvantage. And finally, one thing that's not in the book but is important is that European diseases is actually what wiped out about 80% of the people, right? They had never been exposed to Europeans who had certain diseases that for you could cause a fever or cold for a couple of days, and for those people could be lethal, right? Could be mortal. They could die from that. So they actually didn't have to kill them because they were already dead because their diseases sort of arrived before them, right? Continuing. This is just a map that we saw in class that basically shows the general areas for the Aztecs, the Mayas, and the Incas, right? There's many, many, many small tribes between each of these, but these are the big empires that each fell one after the other. Okay, the first one we're going to see is the Aztecs, right? Hernán Cortés conquered them with the help of other indigenous people who were their subjects. Why? Because the Aztec Empire was enormous and cruel, much like the Roman Empire. Do the people who are subjects of the Roman Empire necessarily agree with it? No, they were conquered people, right? They had lost a war against Rome. Rome takes their territory and forces them to pay, very important, tributes. You need to know that word for the exam, okay? When your territory is conquered by an empire and you're absorbed into the empire, you have to pay them taxes in the form of tributes. And what that is money that says, I recognize that I'm part of this empire, I'm benefiting from being part of this empire, right? I'm receiving protection from the empire, and I have to pay for that, whether I want to or not, right? King Moctezuma was taken prisoner, right? And eventually the empire fell. Next is Pizarro with the Incas, okay? Try to keep each conquistador with his area, okay? Try to keep them straight. Again, took advantage of fighting within the Incan Empire and executed the emperor in the end. So basically cut off the head of the entire empire. This is the area of Peru, right? And Spanish conquest of the Mayan lands began in 1527, and this was the slowest one to fall. So it didn't actually completely fall until about the 18th century. It was a very bloody conflict there. Okay, a couple important new institutions there to organize all the money and wealth coming in was the Casa de Contratación. These are both in Seville, by the way. Responsible for governing trade with Spanish America, and the Consejo de Indias. It's a body that advised the king on issues in America. This is where Seville really grew as a powerful city because as the ships came down the Guadalquivir, they left from that port, right? So it was a place that was most logical to have this kind of people take care of all the wealth and taxes coming in, the tobacco, right? These buildings, you can still see them today. They're sort of emblematic buildings of Seville. Okay. How is land organized? Into viceroyalities. Is land governed by a viceroy, as we saw with Felipe II, they kept viceroys who were direct governors, representatives of the king, right? And we have two important ones, New Spain and Peru. So we have New Spain here was, and Peru. Right? Later they added more. We have Brazil, Granada, and some up in the area that's now the United States. Okay, a few important consequences of the discoveries, right? Politically, Spain and Portugal became huge colonial empires. We saw in the other video the map of the area that Felipe II had under his control, and it was basically the entire world. This is where we get the phrase, the sun never set on the Spanish Empire, right? Because as the sun was rising in the Philippines, it was setting in California, right? And he controlled all of that. frequent abuse by the colonizers caused Spain to eventually pass laws to defend the Native American people because the colonizers who moved there abused them so terribly that they eventually ended up in something good because they had to officially recognize human rights for those people. Economically, of course, gold and silver poured into Europe from the Americas, which helped Europe as a whole. Not so much Spain, because we had to use that to pay our debt, so they went more to banks in Belgium than they did to Spain, really, but they helped us a little bit get out of our debt. New crops were introduced. We got corn, we got potatoes, tomatoes. We introduced to them animals like horses, cows, sheep, and pigs, right? As well as other crops like wheat, grapes, coffee, and rice. Socially, the indigenous population was decimated by wars, disease, and overwork. One thing that's, again, not in the book, but I think is an important figure for you to have clear, you don't have to memorize it, but have an idea, is that the native population dropped from 32 million in 1520 to 28 years later, in 1548, to 5 million. So 75% of the population was killed in a period of 28 years. In one generation, right, it was completely decimated. Many Spaniards immigrated to America and mixed with the indigenous population, and this creates what they and we now call mestizos, right? Sort of a new race, even though we know race is an idea more than anything else, but it's like an ethnicity that we've created, right? And then culturally, finally, humans could truly understand the real dimensions of the world, right? We had a much better idea of how large the world was and what was left in what was unknown. Finally, Spanish culture and Christian religion were brought to America. So this obviously has a huge influence, especially in what's left of Latin America.